Dom and Johnny in the morning. So this topic actually segues nicely from what we were just talking about before the recording, because today's question is from Eric. He was asking, as a chief instructor, do you ever feel like you're being tested when another instructor tests your students for rank?
Ooh, that's a cool question. I think that I'm sweating all the whenever someone comes out to test the kids, and I'm sitting, because I as a chief instructor, I feel like it's my responsibility to not interfere with a test, and to let the proctor do their thing. So I sit in the corner. Sometimes I take pictures, and I just sit there and sweat, and I'm just like, come on. Like, in the second a student goes the wrong direction in one opinion, and I'm like, oh, come on. But it's funny. We feel personally responsible for their successes and their failures, and I think it's cool though, because even though we are only partially responsible for how they perform on a test, and a testing situation is a very hard situation, especially when people, the first couple of tests, they're not used to it. It puts you kind of in that fight or flight mode, and sometimes things that you've done a million times perfectly get a little wonky. But I think the feeling that chief instructors get is a testament to the fact that we feel like we're on the journey with our students. Mm-hmm. So we share in their successes and we share in their failures. And I think instructors that have absolutely no feeling about how their kids do on tests, I almost don't want to say this, but I feel like that's a sign that they're really just doing this for the paycheck. I feel like if you are so invested in your kids that you get excited when they succeed and you want to help them when they fail, I feel like that's a sign that you're in it for the right reasons.
Oh, absolutely. One of the things that this got me thinking about, and you mentioned it before, and I'm going to have you talk about it, is just different testing philosophies and kind of the advantages and disadvantages of the way you go about testings or gradings or whatever you do in your system. So you were saying that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the only formal exam is the black belt test, but before that they do something different.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is true of all schools, but the majority of the schools I've seen. So Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu has an interesting ranking system. It's white, blue, purple, brown, black. And they do separate white to blue for kids. Depending on the school, they might have some in-between colors. But for the most part, white, blue, purple, brown, black. And they've got a little black bar on the end of each belt where you could put 4 white stripes. So if you're a white belt and you have 4 white stripes, it means you're getting ready for a blue belt, and then same thing. But you never know when that's going to happen, and it's kind of at the mercy of your instructor when they feel like you are ready. So they watch you, they see what you're doing, they see you putting in the work, and they're like, all right, they're ready for a stripe. You don't know when it's coming, but at the end of class, they'll pull a stripe, out of nowhere, and they'll say, come on up. And the same when you get a new belt. So I think the way we do things, they get that same level of excitement, but it's when we hand them the test letter. So that's the unknown moment when they're like, yes, I'm testing. In the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu schools that I've been in, it's the belt comes out.
Yeah.
All of a sudden they produce a belt out of nowhere. I don't know where they hide it, in their gi or something. And they just say, come on up. And it's the coolest experience because you have no idea. You don't expect it. So very, very different. But we used to tell this to our students, and actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I feel like I need to say it more in my classes. But we used to ask them, when do you test for your next rank? And John, the answer is?
Each and every class.
Yeah, each and every class. And I feel like when you're not looking for a test letter, and you know that the belt could come, at any time, I feel like it puts that pressure on you to feel like you're testing every class. I'm going to come in and put in my effort every class because I never know when that blue belt's going to come out, or I never know when that purple belt's going to come out. And I feel like the kids step it up when they get their test letter, but sometimes they forget that to get that test letter, they need to be, feeling like they're testing every class.
Yeah, well, and I was kind of thinking about the upsides and downsides, and there are a lot of masters in our style that say this frequently, which is they study other arts to gain a greater appreciation of the main art that they've achieved mastery in or whatever. And like you just said, the upside of promoting that way is that because you never know, you always want to put in your best effort. The kind of philosophical disadvantage of that is it does kind of take the artificial pressure of testing off because you do never know. It's not like you can really build it up in your mind. And one of the things I do like about the feeling of that pressure is if you needed to defend yourself, it would be an uncomfortable situation. And the more you can put yourself in uncomfortable situations, the less foreign it is, unfortunately, if you ever did need to use your art to defend yourself. So that is one of the reasons I do kind of like the tests. And even if a kid messes up under that pressure, to me, that's a vehicle for a conversation about the fact that I know you can do 5 combination and that, you're not just forgetting it because you're being lazy or whatever. It's that pressure is something that revealed what your nervous system is actually trained to do, when you're put under pressure. So I also just logistically like having a formal ceremony for a belt promotion, especially for kids and teens, just because their parents know to be there. If you were doing it kind of like randomly or they weren't expected, a parent or a close family member may miss out on celebrating that promotion. So again, it's upsides and downsides. Like what
Yeah.
And it's just what values are you going to prioritize with the way you go about things?
No, that makes a lot of sense. And in all honesty, like I feel like with to speak to the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu side, I feel like they put themselves in that situation more because of how the art is, they can at the end of each class they're rolling.
Right.
And it's like full pressure. Like they're not taking away anything. It's not like, if we sparred full contact, people are going to leave injured.
Right.
But these guys roll with maximum intent. So they're putting them in that situation more where with punches and kicks, unfortunately, unless we're being really careful, especially with the kids, someone's going to get really hurt. But yeah, I agree though, because that's and I'm going to mess up the term, but I think it's pronounced sugio, but it's a Japanese term that essentially means pushing past what you think is possible. And I think that's something you get on tests that you don't get anywhere else. So
yeah, well, and especially my sister was just talking about this with one of our first degrees who's now kind of getting toward the end of the first degree curriculum and starting to map out, what is second degree going to look like, how long away is it going to be. And I do think in the long run, it's not bad to achieve a rank, celebrate it, and then go through a season where you kind of coast for a little bit, and really just kind of enjoy the journey instead of always having to put the pedal to the metal 100% all the time. That's not good to train all the time, but there is kind of this natural rhythm I've noticed of our higher ranks where, you spend some time going more zone 2 and installing the lessons of the rank in all of your material. And then, as you start getting closer to rank progression, now they don't really worry about learning new lessons as much as getting the reps, upping the intensity, and making sure that they're effective with whatever the new principles are. And that is something I feel like a lot of times martial artists do burn out, not necessarily emotionally, but physically if they go too hard too much. Although I will say that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is designed in a way where you don't get as hurt as often as ballistic arts just by its nature. I just remember Joe Rogan talking about moving away from Taekwondo toward BJJ because when he was competing, he had an acquaintance take a shot to the head and it messed him up for the rest of his life. And so the nice thing about jiu-jitsu is you might, wrench a joint or something. There are ways to get hurt, especially if you're not tapping. And it tends to have a little more margin for error than something where it's ballistic and going full contact or something like that.
Yeah. Then that's true. I know we're slightly off topic, but a lot of Taekwondo athletes, if you look at their age, you don't see a lot of older Taekwondo athletes, just because that is a rough style. Just the kicks that they have to do and how much pressure they're putting on their body. Usually, their hips can't take it.
Yeah.
Their hips can't take it. Their knees can't take it. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, depending on how you practice it, a lot of the best practitioners of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu are getting up in years. And man, they're just, the only difference between, rolling with them and rolling with someone who's younger is they only move as much as they need to, and they're always a million steps ahead of you, and they're not worried about neck cranks anymore because there's no way you're going to be able to pull it off on one of them. So when you start Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I think there's a lot more margin for error. I'll roll. I rolled with one of my colleagues yesterday, and I'm still feeling it in my neck and shoulders, just because I don't have that level of skill, But once you get to a point, yeah, it's just you could do it forever and not have to worry.
Well, and I just wonder how much of that comes down to what you're asking the body to do. Taekwondo is very explosive, and as we get older, it's harder to be explosive. Whereas I feel with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, there's so much connective tissue strengthening that happens over time that, as you get older, you're training in a way where as you get older, you can keep getting stronger in that way. So that's what makes it a little easier to maintain your skill as you age.
Yeah, and I think I think we're right in the middle. So
for SKK.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I think we live in that cross section where there's a little bit more risk involved because of 4 weeks of fighting.
Yes. Yeah.
But we're still this is a longevity art that you could practice until you get older. It's pretty cool, and you just become just like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, become more and more efficient.
To circle back a little bit more to the original question, that is another function of testing that I really like. I like the fact that we have tests, and we do call them tests. Some schools do the same thing, and they call them graduations or celebrations. And the reason I like the term test is because, yes, there is a celebratory element of, going up in rank. A lot of schools will also use the term grading, as in you can fail this. And there have been times, very few, that we've had students, show up to the test and not receive rank, usually because of a refusal to participate or they get emotionally overwhelmed or something like that. But to me, it's a test of your material. It's like a diagnostic.
Yeah.
And so as an instructor, watching your students test, that's one way to look at it, is just how well you taught them. And then sometimes it'll reveal things that in normal classes don't get revealed, so to spend a little extra attention on them later. So that's why I really like having someone come out and proctor an instructor that they don't usually get to work with, because then now we get to see how they perform under pressure, and that way that guides us as their teachers to be able to direct their training a little more effectively.
That's so interesting to think about, and I'm always telling students, especially my adult students who compete, because I do have a strange amount of those, but to film their matches or have someone film their matches so you can rewatch and see your blind spots. So you know what? I'm going to make a declaration right now that I may or may not remember by the time the next test comes around. But I'm going to sit in the corner and I'm going to have a notepad.
Yep.
One, because I think that'll put more stress on the students, which is good.
Yeah.
And two, because you're right. That's an awesome diagnostic tool to just watch and just be like, okay, I happen to notice that every child in this room is pivoting on their heels.
Right.
We need to spend more time on that. Yeah.
Well, and actually, just to speak to that, in our karate camp movies, named so because they are very campy, there's a joke that if you want to be official, you get a clipboard. And the kids think that's just a goofy joke. But the reality is that was something Master Stephanie taught me once, is if you want people to really pay attention, you walk in with a clipboard. And doesn't even have to have anything on it. Mine usually does, but that's like, it does change the way that you think about things and look at things, you know, when it looks like you're taking notes, because now it's not just you looking at them and kind of wishy-washy making things. It's like there's something different with the way you pay attention. And that was what I was trained when I was first coordinating testing for our school is get a clipboard, sit in the lobby, you know, or in the corner, however best it is, to observe the students and make notes about trends or patterns or, you know, things that need to get worked on, anything like that. I also think it is a good test for the instructors too, and not a test as in like you can pass or fail, but as a diagnostic over how engaged you are with your students' progression. Because like you said, if you don't care how your students do, it's a disservice to them ultimately, because you're not, they need to know that you care. And sometimes I question why instructors teach. For me, it genuinely started as a selfish thing. I was observing that the instructors who taught had better art. So it was like, well, if I have to explain it to someone else, that's going to force me to learn it better. And if somebody else benefits from it, then that's a win-win. But it started as a selfish thing. And you can only get so far with that for so long. Sometimes it allows you to be more emotionally resilient when you share the journey with your student, like you were talking about. So yeah, I think there's a lot of benefits from a formal evaluation, as opposed to not that there's anything wrong with surprising them with rank either. Master Ken has mentioned before that, you know, for kids, logistically it's good to have their parents there for a celebration, but I think he talked recently about he was in an adult class and he just surprised one of his adults with a new rank at the end of class. Like, you know, it's also okay to do things based on who your students are and what's going to be most appropriate for presenting them with a promotion. Dom and Johnny in the morning.